Today you will be learning about the causes of the American Revolution. This war eventually led colonists to declare their independence from Great Britain and become the United States of America. But what caused colonists to make this decision to become their own country? In our previous unit in social studies, we learned about the French Indian War, which lasted from 1754 to 1763 between the French and the British. We know that the British won this war and gained claims to the land in Canada as well as the colony areas of the United States. King George in England had provided much of the funding that the colonists and the British troops needed in order to win this war. And following the French and Indian War, he was concerned about how he was going to make that money back. The French and Indian War was very expensive for me and my kingdom. I must find a way to make that money back. I know, I'm going to tax the colonists. In 1764, King George passed the Sugar Act. This act was a tax on molasses, which was a sweetener commonly used at the time. And this tax was directly linked to King George trying to pay off the expenses of the French and Indian War that had ended a year earlier. Colonists were concerned because British officials were monitoring that the taxes were paid, and they were worried about what the British government was planning for the future. One of the main problems that colonists had with this tax was they were being taxed without representation. This meant that the colonists did not have representation or a vote in the British Parliament, which was their government. The colonists were really concerned when King George continued to pass taxes in order to pay for the French and Indian War. In 1765, King George passed the Stamp Act. This act taxed many common paper products that colonists were using, such as legal documents, permits, contracts, even playing cards. Colonists were extremely frustrated that they were continuing to be taxed without representation. They still had no vote in Parliament. In 1773, King George passed the Tea Act, and this act taxed tea specifically from the British East India Trading Company and required colonists to get their tea from this company. Colonists still didn't have any vote in Parliament, so they were increasingly frustrated at how little King George was listening to them, yet he continued to pass these taxes. The colonists had finally had enough. On December 16, 1773, the colonists fought back in what became known as the Boston Tea Party. Boston officials refused to return 3 ships of tea from the East India Trading Company. Colonists dressed as Native Americans threw tea into the harbor, destroying the tea. This made King George very angry. I am so angry at the colonists' behavior in Boston, Massachusetts. That Boston Tea Party was ridiculous. I must find a way to get back at them. I'm going to pass the Intolerable Acts to make Boston an example for the rest of the colonies. No one disrespects King George that way. In 1774, as a direct response to the colonist Boston Tea Party, King George passed the Intolerable Acts. These were a series of 5 laws that were kind of like the last straw for the colonists. They were still receiving no say in Parliament, they still had no vote, and they were tired of being taxed without representation. This eventually led to the American Revolution in 1775.